Bilateral relations between China and Armenia are deeply rooted, dating back to ancient times when Armenia was a major hub on the Silk Road. The modern version of the Silk Road, known as the Belt and Road Initiative, launched by China, is driving deeper cooperation between the two sides. How do Armenians see this relationship and China's development? How is China's political system and the Communist Party of China seen through an Armenian scholar's perspective? Earlier, I had the pleasure to talk to Dr. Benyamin Poghosyan, chairman of the Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies, joining me from Yerevan, the capital city of Armenia. I started by asking him about his personal experiences here in China. So I understand you worked for 10 years for the only Armenian state think tank dealing with foreign policy and security. You have prepared and managed the elaboration of more than 100 policy papers, which were presented to your country's leadership. And in 2017, you founded the Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies, and you have studied China since the beginning of this century because of the fascinating growth of the Chinese economy. But you only came to China in person in 2016, during which you said you were deeply impressed with what you saw. So had you wished you could have visited China earlier, and what were you looking for on that trip? Did you find it?
Again, thank you for having me. Definitely the first trip to China in 2016, it was really impressive. Yes, of course, I had a lot of information about China, academic information and media information. But when my first visit took place in 2016, I was really impressed, and not only by fantastic infrastructure, by the fantastic development path, but also mostly I was impressed by the Chinese people, the attitude of Chinese people to foreigners. Because due to my job, I have traveled in many countries in the world, but there are only few countries when you really feel like home. When first time you enter the country, but you feel like home. And China was one of these few countries when I really feel myself as a home, and I really received this very positive atmosphere and very positive welcome by Chinese people. So definitely infrastructure, economic development, these were really, really impressive. But number one, it was the attitude of Chinese people which impressed me more.
So you were interacting with ordinary people, men and women, during their daily life in the small alleyways, I guess, in cities or in rural areas. But how do you understand, besides the warm feeling they gave you, they shared with you, how do you understand their needs and aspirations and the way how these needs and aspirations were met? Did you feel that they were reasonably positive about the future, that they were reasonably satisfied with the way their life has been going over the past few decades?
Definitely, I have encounters both with people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and also in people with a younger generation. And when they compare their own life, like for example, China 40, 45 years from now and current China, they were said that the development of China was really impressive and the living standards were much, much higher. So they all were looking to the future with much optimism, telling that at least starting from 1979, 1980, when the reform and opening up started, there was tremendous development in China. And several 100 million people, I will say 700 million people, have been raised from poverty, which is really fantastic achievement by China. So yes, in China, I have a feeling that this is a country which has confidence, and this is a people which have confidence that they are moving towards the right direction. And there is the confidence that their children will live much better lives than their parents.
Obviously, your experience is very different from what people would normally read about in their press, in their newspaper, or on their TV when they live in a different country and they haven't seen things for themselves. The way how the Chinese people's needs and aspirations are met is described by China as a bottom-up, people-centered, whole-process democracy. What is your understanding of this Chinese concept and its legitimacy?
My understanding is that Chinese state and the Communist Party of China, they are really work for the people. So what I saw in China, that entire state apparatus, they are working to fulfill the dreams of Chinese people. We all know that China has a long history of several thousand years And definitely, based on their tradition, the Chinese state and the Communist Party of China, they are making efforts to make everyday life of Chinese better and better. So my understanding of this whole process democracy is that the state and the leading Communist Party, they are doing everything possible to raise living standards of the Chinese. So the number one priority for the Chinese state is to increase the living standards of Chinese people, which is definitely the most important task for any state.
How do you understand the role, the leadership role provided by the Communist Party of China then, and what do you see as the difference between its role and that of political parties in a Western sense?
In the Western sense, we hear a lot of things about democracy, but let's understand what democracy means. It means the rule of the people. But in many Western countries, in reality, we see the rule of money, because we see how these big corporations, they are funding the campaigns. We know that in campaigns, candidates, they are spending billions of dollars. And when you are receiving donations from big companies, regardless what they are representing, it's a defense industrial complex, it's a big pharma, definitely they have also influence on you. And also, let's not forget that many citizens in the West, they have disappointment on the system, and we see less and less people participating in elections. And what we have, for example, usually 40% of people participate in election. From this 40%, let's assume 40% votes for some party, which means that in general population, this party receives less than 20% of votes. But then he starts to rule. So again, if we speak about democracy as a rule of people, but how can we say that the party which receives 20 or even less than 20% of the vote from overall majority of population can represent as a population and can rule on behalf of these people? And also we see some cases of legal corruption in the Western democracies. For example, the lobbying, which is very famous in the United States. From my perspective, what does lobbying mean? The big and small corporations, they are legally spending money to influence the political system. Is it corruption? Yes. Is it legal corruption? Yes.
A lot of people, some people would say, look, okay, there are a lot of defects with the Western political system, but in China, you don't have the so-called one person, one vote system. How do you ensure that the Chinese people's will or their aspiration are translated into policies and, implemented along the way? What is your observation of the way how Chinese democracy works and can work?
My understanding is that China has very clear filters. And really, there is a meritocratic system. So you have to have real capacities and abilities to go forward in the state apparatus. And this is really very important. At the basic level, as far as I know, there are general elections in China, but then there is a system of filters which based on meritocracy. So only people who have capacities to govern a village and successfully govern a village, then they are allowed to start to govern a city. And you have capacities to govern a city, and you show that you can reach some successes, then you are allowed to go on the regional level, and then on the state level. So there is a clear system which works, and at the end of the day, the own people should give the assessment. Yes, the Chinese system, it works for China. And we all know that China is not in a position to force its system on others, telling others you should live as China or you should live as a China. So this is also very important, that the system works for China, and the fantastic achievements of China, and everybody speaks about fantastic achievements of China, at least for the last 40 years, and I may say starting from 1949, when People's Republic of China was established. This fantastic achievement is a clear sign that this system works for China. And when we are speaking, does the system good or bad, what is the criteria? The criteria, does the system works for the benefits of its own people?
From your background in general as an Armenian, do you understand China's need for a political system that's historically logical, if you know what I mean? I mean, our current system was not airdropped from somewhere or imposed on China, but introduced, found the soil that was receptive and needy and grew out of the soil, out of the environment. It is not something that's imposed onto the Chinese people. What is your understanding of the historical logic of the Chinese political system?
Armenian people, as the Chinese people, we have very long history, thousand-year, millennia history, and as you mentioned, yes, our relations are rooted in the deep history and in a deep cooperation coming back from ancient Silk Road, when Armenia was one of the hubs of this ancient Silk Road. So what is common between Armenian and Chinese people? First, we value our national identity. Second, we value our national traditions. We are not against globalization, we are not against modernization, but also we do not understand globalization and modernization as a way to forget everything about your identity, to forget all your national values, and accept some general or globalized values. And here I fully understand the Chinese respect to their values, traditions, and their history. Because definitely the system should also be based on your traditions and history. Again, it does not mean you are against modernization, it does not mean you are against globalization, but also both Armenian and Chinese people, we value our identity, we value our national traditions, and we would like to base our current system also on our long history, millennia-long history.
There's this entrenched idea of a dichotomy on many people's mind about political system. For instance, it's either democracy or autocracy. They seem to see the world in black and white. Either you are like us, then you're democratic, you're part of us, you're a friend or partner, or you are authoritarian, then you're against us, you are not one of us. How do you look at such worldviews?
From the point of view of Armenia or any small state, this dichotomy or the world dividing black and white, either you're with us or you are against us, this is very dangerous. Because small and compact states like an Armenia, and even I will say middle powers, they don't want to be catch up in this great power competition, and we don't want to be pushed that, okay, you should not be friend with this country because he's an authoritarian, or you should be a friend of this country because he's a democracy. From our perspective, the key here is a national interest, and the key here is a just system which will protect also the rights of the small and middle powers. Because unfortunately, we know the history, at least starting from 16th century, and we know the history of slavery and other terrible crimes, which also have been done by the powers which now claim that are the poor democratic and etc. So from Armenian perspective, all this dichotomy between so-called democracy and autocracy, it has nothing to do with the real base, but it has to do with geopolitical interest.
Finally, 2022 marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Armenia and China, and Armenia was one of the first countries to join China's Belt and Road Initiative. You have also been involved in materializing bilateral cooperation projects on the ground. Can you brief us briefly on the progress so far and the prospects looking ahead?
Armenia values its relationship with China, and Armenia values Belt and Road Initiative. And we strongly believe that the emerging multipolar world, and the world is really would be multipolar, and also it will be multilateral. What does it mean multilateral? It does mean that all powers, regardless of their size, should have something in international relations. And we fully support Chinese vision of multilateral world, when regardless of your size, every power has rights, every power has obligations, and we really welcome the increased involvement of China in international relations. Regarding Belt and Road Initiative, the key goal behind this initiative is to create new infrastructure, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure. We all know about digital Silk Road, health Silk Road, and physical infrastructure. And Armenia is definitely interested. As you mentioned, Armenia was part of ancient Silk Road, and Armenia is ready to be part of also current new Silk Road, especially digital Silk Road. Because, as you probably know, IT sector is one of the most developing sectors in Armenia, every year recording 25% of growth. And here Armenia can play a significant role to be part of digital Silk Road.
Great. Well, I certainly do hope that your country's leadership and the general public share the same vision about the Belt and Road Initiative and about relations with China vis-a-vis Armenia. Thank you so much, Dr. Benyamin Poghosyan, Chairman of the Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies in Armenia, joining me from the Armenian capital of Yerevan.
Thank you very much.